Now that Silksong is finally out, of course everyone has already beaten it, mastered it, 200%ed it, and discussion always turns to what will be next with DLC. But for today's critical thought, we're going to talk about the use of DLC among indie developers, where it's best used at, and why even amazing DLC can still hurt a game if it's not properly planned right. Post-release support has become a very common tactic among indie and AAA developers for the past about decade now. The option, of course, to continue updating a game can also be seen in live service design. But for our subject today, we're talking specifically about single-player games. So this is when we see games receiving new content in the form of new levels, new systems. Probably one of the biggest examples, of course, would be from Paradox Interactive with their whole DLC structure after their games are released. And when we look at the pros of DLC support, it can do a lot to greatly extend the lifespan of a game. If you know this game's going to be receiving a new level, new maps every 3 to 6 months, it means people keep playing it. Again, it's why it's a very required part of live service to keep developing more content. For a single player game, it allows you to keep it in the news, which means more people will play, which means it will stay on the front store pages, which means more people will hear about, so more people will buy it, and you get the picture. And in the best case scenarios, great DLC can greatly improve a game to the point that it's seen almost as, you must have it. It's just that good, or it's just that groundbreaking. Some big examples, of course, would be the DLC from the various versions of The Binding of Isaac. XCOM 2's War of the Chosen DLC that just dramatically adds so much and improves on that game that it makes it very much a definitive edition. And the word definitively is used a lot when we talk about great DLC. When this is the best possible version of the game with all the bells, whistles, quality of life features, and more added to it. And again, the allure is there to just keep adding more to a game. If you enjoyed this game, if your fans enjoy it, what's the harm with adding another few levels, another few more months of support, and somewhere someone should be starting to feel like the knife being stuck into their chest at the moment. But the point that we're trying to talk about, where I send the stinger, is that DLC thrown at every single game, it doesn't work. And more importantly, you need to understand what is the best places to add content and when you need to kind of rein it all in. Now, when I first came with this idea for this video topic, it came with the roguelike Revita. This was a game that we played, I think this was back at the beginning of 2024, maybe late 2023. I enjoyed the game. It had a very solid take on it. And developers started to work on kind of their big 2.0 patch. It was going to be this massive update, add, change, transform a lot of the game. It would be essentially a fundamentally different game. And the months went on. Kept adding more to the idea, but nothing new was being thrown at it. And the publisher just eventually said, well, the game is not doing well enough to justify it. And they had to cut back on the funding of it. As of me recording this, I'm going to do a quick edit here so I can look this up. So as of right now, the developer has kind of gone dark on it. But before they did, and this was again at the beginning of 2024, they were detailing a lot of high-level and major changes to the game. However, no matter how great or expansive your post-release support can be, there's two very big factors that you need to understand. The first one is that no matter how amazing, thought-provoking, unique, original your DLC will be, it is not going to sell as many copies as you think. See, DLC, no matter what the game is going to be always aimed at one particular group. The people who have already played, beaten, and enjoyed your game. The people who did not churn out of it. So, as we talk a lot about sustainability and looking at the consumer base for a game. If this game sold 500,000 copies, and let's say only 100,000 got halfway through, and maybe 40,000 beat the game. If you release new posts, new game plus, or after you've gone near the end of the game content for it, your potential audience is not going to be 500,000. It may only be between 40 to 80,000 of the people who played your game in the first place. And while we look at major successes, again, like we saw with Hollow Knight, and I'm assuming at some point in the future with Silksong, their DLC was added to a game that was immensely popular, and more importantly, that DLC was free. And DLC in of itself is never going to save a bad game, and unfortunately, it won't even save an average game as well. Because again, you're working with a far smaller consumer base for your DLC. Even, again, as I said, that we've seen some amazing examples of post-release support between Hollow Knight, The Binding of Isaac, XCOM, and I'm forgetting a lot of others, Paradox Interactive, as I mentioned earlier. But again, you're dealing with a far more limited audience than you would otherwise. Now, you do release the Definitive Edition, Game of the Year Edition, DLC Edition, whatever you want to call it edition, you can kind of get around that to some extent. But if you're expecting DLC to sell equal or more than the retail release of your game, it's never going to happen. And speaking about Hollow Knight and eventually, I'm assuming, Silksong, that takes us to the other factor. The amount of cost that goes into good DLC. As I said in the last part, Revita's mega update was basically planned for months, I think even over a year in terms of support or planned development for it. And Hollow Knight's development, or the DLC for that, it didn't come out immediately. It took a lot of time for it. And you see, this is the other trap developers can fall into. If your game was a modest success and you then go, well, I'm going to spend 3 years making DLC for it, you can easily find all your funding just going right out the window. And people, again, will point to successes like Paradox Interactive and Team Cherry in this case. But remember, Team Cherry had a monumental success with Hollow Knight. That game sold pretty damn well. They had enough money in their coffers to keep supporting the game and keep putting things out. If your game just barely broke even, making 2 years of additional support for it is not going to work as well as you may think. As I said, one, because of the cost that goes into it, and the far smaller consumer base that you have. But that hasn't stopped developers from, again, trying to push this stuff out. They'll say that it's for the fans, or they're hoping that the Definitive Edition will be the massive success for this game. And I'm sure there are a few examples out there, maybe a few you even know of them off the top of your head. But any that you can come up with will always be exceptions to this rule. When we look at consumer bases, and again, the structure for good DLC, it takes a lot of time to make this work. And you may have that perfect idea that's going to just dramatically reinvent your game. But if a game has already been released, it's already come out, and people already know about it, you're not going to be attracting a newer audience unless you can really go big. Again, there are cases, as we've seen with games that have had fundamental changes from retail to a DLC or to an expansion. Darktide, that we've been playing for our multiplayer nights, had a very huge restructuring after months and rebalancing done. And like I said, these are more fringe examples. Your game, ideally, should not be fundamentally changing from DLC to DLC. You can add new stuff to it. You can make it bigger and better. But if you are completely rebuilding your core gameplay loop, your monetization systems, the whole shebang, that is not as big of a flex as you may think it is for the consumer. Now, if it works, like we've said, it can help a game. But it's not something that you should be doing every 3 to 6 months or every year, especially if it is a single player driven game. Now, there is one other point I want to mention when it comes to DLC support along these lines, because it is another factor that it doesn't kind of make itself known when you first start doing it, but it will always happen. And that is running out of ideas. It's great to release DLC. It's great to do post-release support if you do it on the smaller scale. Like, let's say the game is selling modestly or pretty good, and you decide to release, let's say, a new item, a new enemy. And it's not that big of a deal, or it's smaller than what we talk about with brand new systems and maps. And you do it every so often. At some point, you're going to run out of ideas. It's always going to happen. No matter how many crazy thoughts are in your head, eventually you're going to get through all of them. And not every one of those ideas may work out well. We have seen another case of DLCs where it goes, okay, this is the amazing DLC. This is the horrible one. Do not touch it. This one's okay. This one, eh. This one, buy it the second it comes out. And ideally, when we talk about successful DLC models on this line, they should all be good. But that is oftentimes not the case. But to get back to the point, you are going to eventually run out of ideas. At some time, your game is really done. It probably would have been done 10 times over by now. And as an indie developer, you cannot coast on a single game indefinitely. Again, someone will of course mention something like AI Wars, or of course Minecraft. But even those, again, are exceptions. How many of you are going to make your own take on Minecraft that's going to be as equally successful? Let me know about that one down in the comments. But no matter what, you cannot just keep working on a single game and expecting it to do as well or keep sustaining you as a studio. At some point, you need to be thinking about what is your next game. And some of the things that I've heard from a lot of smaller developers and those who have done post-release support is that they have a list of ideas they want to implement. There's something that has come a lot when I talk with Chris Park from Arkin, that when his game is done, he has a good idea of the stuff he would like to add. But when that list is eventually done, or let's say there's no longer an interest, he's got to move on to the next game. And this is again that point that I made a lot in my Cozy book that I just finished, but you have to understand that at some point, it is okay to say that this game is done. It is finished. It has all the content. I'm not going to add more to it. Maybe I'll do a bug fix. Maybe I'll do something like that. But for all intents and purposes, this game is complete. And you should never feel pressured or forced to do DLC. That again is another easily steppable trap for a lot of first-time developers. Your game comes out, it's great, people like it, and they're like, okay, can you add 8 more DLCs? I want 20 more levels, 50 more enemies. Just add multiplayer in a DLC. Pro tip, do not have multiplayer as a DLC goal for your game. That is a super colossal red flag. And people will, of course, complain if you don't have any new content. That is entirely fair, and, it is up to them. But as a developer, you need to put or draw a line in the sand as to what does the future of this game look like. Do you have ideas for 5, 10, 30, 80 more hours of content and systems? Do you have 1 hour? Do you have 0 hours? Like I said, there's no shame in just saying, okay, this game is done. We're moving on. It's out. We're not thinking about new stuff for it. It is always good to have ideas if your game does well. Again, if there's no shame in just moving on from a game, there's also no shame in having those, eye in the sky ideas of, okay, maybe we could add this, or this could be a fun addition. But again, it all comes down to how you develop your game and what you are planning for the future of your studio. As we said, a huge change that has happened with a lot of developers over the past 5 years or so has been a greater focus on sustainability. If we were talking 10 years ago, like mid to early 2010s, a lot of indie developers were just putting everything they had into that first release. That we don't need DLC because we're just adding every single idea we want day one. Today, it's a different story. If you want to survive, you need to make sure that you're bringing money in. And if you can release a smaller, more compact game that's amazing, more power to you. And if it does do incredibly well, and you have these other ideas that were kind of good, but not, big enough to make it into the 1.0, you can tease that or think about that in terms of DLC. But again, to kind of wrap things up for this video, at the end of the day, you need to be able to understand what is the reach of my game. Is it good enough as is? As a final point, DLC should never be used as emergency fixes for your game or as, life support. The best case examples of when DLC works is if the game is great and you can make it greater. It should not be used as a tourniquet to try and fix this game. That, okay, 1.0 was horrible, it was broken, but you know what? We're going to work on our DLC and we'll charge $10 and we'll make this game fixable in 8 to 12 months because everyone's going to buy it there, right? All the consumers right now, or gamers watching this, I know you would all love to spend $10 to $20 on DLC that will fix a game that you spent money on, right? When DLC is planned properly, again, it can greatly extend these games. It can make a game that was great and keep it in the news cycle, keep it in the interest levels further and further, whether it is a single or multiplayer-driven game. But this model requires you to plan very far ahead. We're talking about that, yes, your game is out 1.0, fantastic. You're going to start working on DLC. Because as another point, you can't just take a game that, let's say you release it in 2015, you never touch it, there's no news, and then in 2019, you come back, you blow the dust off your keyboard and say, hey, we're working on DLC for this game now. Who's interested in it? Once you, like with early access itself, DLC requires a different mindset or post-release support along these lines. Once you start it, you are kind of set down that track. Once you've stopped, you can't come back to it without just completely confusing your audience and your fan base. And there again is no problem with just saying this game hasn't sold enough to justify DLC for it. It sucks to say that, but at the end of the day, it's better to have a modest success that it barely broke even versus throwing the dice and hoping that spending 2 more years of post-release support on this game will take it from a modest success to maybe a slightly more modest success. Because more often than not, it is not going to happen like that. And while you can certainly think about every game having more support, more levels, more maps, more guns, more characters, if the audience isn't there for it, you have to start thinking about what will be your next official project. For those of you watching, here's the final question. Can you think of examples where DLC did save a game? It was a modest or okay game, and the DLC came along and it did manage to break these trends, become this phenomenal title. And can you think of games that just fell down the slippery slope of DLC and a game that was okay just kept getting worse and worse, or it just completely bankrupted the studio in the process? So with that, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to buy all the DLC of Game Wisdom to extend these videos by at least 5 more years of content, and I will see everyone for our next topic. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.